Howdy, y'all, and welcome to another episode of the Stay Creative podcast, a show dedicated to highlighting, promoting, and celebrating the unique art and soul of the many talented independent artists that I meet. Through making this show, I have strengthened an existing belief that you cannot have a conversation with a person about their passion without taking some of it for yourself. So this show is also dedicated to sharing insights, tips, and encouragement that are going to be beneficial to people in any stage of finding, refining, or perfecting their creative voice. Today, we will be talking with John about his music under the title The Antediluvian Projekt. We will be featuring two of his songs, Redacted and High Jump, featuring Flora Lynn on vocals. And as always, we will be discussing some of John's journey to becoming the creative person that he is today. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things he has learned in his time making this music, but also we're going to talk about some of his beliefs about promoting music and finding connection with other people through sharing it. So stick around. Well, I want to give you some time just, to open up and introduce yourself to us, kind of like where are you from? When did you start making music? Those types of things.
Yeah, so, my name's John. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, so I'm in the States, not too far away from you, actually. And I guess the journey for me starts, in my dad's car when I was maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, just listening to 70s, 80s rock and him playing air drums to a lot of the music. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And so that was something that really influenced me. So I wanted to pick up drums, but I didn't pick them up till much later. My formative years was on piano. I started on piano and I hated it. I just wasn't interested in it. And come around, I think it was 5th grade, they usually have, at least in the United States public education system, you can pick an instrument. You can have opportunity to pick an instrument to play. And I picked trumpet, but at the time I got a cornet. My mom there was a family friend that had a cornet, so I started playing that. And I played that all through middle school, and then in high school got much more serious with trumpet and played pretty seriously in a lot of different groups. I played an all-state orchestra, a couple other big groups, and after that I went to college, and I really didn't pursue music much more. I just kind of lost an interest in it, but what I did pick up was a much more interest in rhythm, probably from when I was seeing my dad play air drums when I was younger. And I had started kind of start a band in high school. It's one of those things where it never gets beyond the garage or the basement with a bunch of friends with a piece of crap drum set that I had no idea what I was doing, but we just messed around. It was fun. So that kind of got me excited as far as making our own songs, but most of it was just covers because we had no idea what we're doing. Come college, I kind of got frustrated with the fact that when you go to college to study music performance, it's much more black and white, right and wrong, where there's an exact way to play this piece and that's it. There's much less room for, you could say, the free flow type playing, which I definitely wanted, but I just didn't understand how that could, be consolidated with the college education program. So I ditched it. I stopped playing and I dropped it for about 8 years, and I picked it up about 2 years ago. As far as the music production goes, I've only been making music for probably about 4 years. So 4 years ago, I got a computer powerful enough to run plugins, to run Logic, and just started messing around. And since I had a drum set around from when I played during and after college, just messing around, I kind of said, I've got this drum set, I've got this computer, why don't I try to record some drums? So I had 2 mics, tried to record some drums, and inevitably when you start recording yourself, you realize you sound like shit. And that's the one thing that I wish I would have known, is to embrace the suck, because you're just frustrated endlessly because you're like, this sounds terrible, and all you can think about is trying to make it better. And that's kind of how it progressed from there. So I got more mics, I got more preamps so I could record more mics. I watched a lot of videos on YouTube. That's been the great thing about the internet. We were talking before the show started about a lot of the strengths of the internet and kind of how it's changed how we interact, but also how we create music is you can get information so easily. You don't need to go to a college to learn audio engineering anymore. You can go on YouTube and, in an afternoon, get a course on what you want to learn, which is awesome. That's a really cool thing. So what started off as a couple mics turned into 12 mics recording all of the parts that I recorded for what was this last album. So what's interesting about that is I recorded all the drums and then recorded the music to it. So what started off as the drums was then the basis for the music, which is, I suppose, kind of unusual as far as the writing process goes.
Yeah, to interject just a question, if I'm understanding what you're saying, you had no tune in your head at all. You just wrote a drum part and then crafted the tune and the rest around that.
Yeah, usually what I would do in Logic, and you could do this in any of the DAW that you have, is you just put on the metronome and you can set parameters as far as, when the metronome starts and when it ends. So I would just have a loop going of a metronome, and I would just play beats over the metronome. So if there was a day where I was actually feeling like, when I can play things a little cleaner today, I'm going to play 120 BPM today or 140. And then there were days I would bump it down to 65, just play a loose, very pocketed beat. But it would just be what I was feeling that day, and I would just put a metronome on and play. And what I would do after that is were there sections that I played better than others? I would take those out, put them in the DAW, and then right over top of them. And that's how all the songs are written.
Yeah, so you did not, in this recording drums first, you didn't keep an entire take. You, at that point, would take the, to a click concept and cut it and put it how you wanted it, or orchestrate it from there?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. I liked the free-flowing improv parts because you can definitely tell there's some parts where it's longer, unedited parts than, say, other ones that are, I guess you could say, a riff. It's a riff, and then it keeps going, and then that's how it goes. But I like having the parts where I'm kind of just playing a very open beat that, by modern standards, might be considered sloppy. But the ebb and flow is something I wanted to keep in the music, and definitely when I decided to add trumpet back in, and that's really what propelled me to release music, because what I had after doing the drum experiment was I had basically software guitars over recorded drums, but it wasn't interesting enough for me to really release. It was pretty plain. It was kind of, it was cool, don't get me wrong, but it's not something I really had the intention of releasing. But when I picked up trumpet again, started practicing, I thought, well, I've never heard trumpet as a lead instrument in a metal band. I wonder how this would work. And so it all just became an experiment to see where it might go. And that's kind of where I'm at now with it.
Yeah. Man, it's really fantastic. Like it has that quality of the person who made this was really enjoying themselves, but it also has very much the person who made this knew what they were doing, put in
Somewhat.
The research and the time. Yeah. And you were talking about how YouTube has made it to where you don't have to go to college to learn certain things anymore. And I think that in its own way has kind of separated people by specific drive levels. Like I hear a great deal of what I would say like positive or healthy ambition in what you've created. And now hearing how you made it, I'd say that absolutely has got to be the case.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too, and thank you, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I knew I needed to incorporate music in my life. And I guess this is figuring out how. A lot of what music you create is figuring out how you would create it, and that what is kind of what makes it unique to you, because how I would make music is completely different than, say, you would make it, or any of the people in the chat might approach making it. And I think a lot of that is just embracing how you make it and not always take how other people make music as the only way to do it. Sometimes it can be oversimplified to, oh, well, this is the only way to do it. And a lot of it actually has to do with, no, you got to figure out how you might do it. Now, there are ways to figure out, and that's where the education comes in, to learn from other people. Okay, how did they approach this? How did they try to write music? I watched a really good podcast with Mick Gordon, who did the soundtrack for the most recent Doom games, which is insane. The soundtrack is just amazing. If you have a chance to check it out, it's stupid good. I did a podcast I listened to a podcast he did. Actually, it might have been a talk at the Game Developers Conference. And he said something that really resonated with me that kind of made me more comfortable with how I was doing things. Was he said, change the process, change the outcome. So in a lot of ways, the process is what's going to decide what your outcome is. In a lot of ways, we put the outcome before the process and think, well, this is my desired outcome, and I need to find a way exactly to that, where it's actually much more opposite than that. Yeah, Mick Gordon is amazing. The guy's responding in the chat. He's insane. Soundscapes he made for, BFG Division. That song's awesome. I just worked out to it today, actually. And that's actually how I really got into heavier music, was working out, because I needed something aggressive. And, when you work out, you're not going to really listen to. I didn't really listen to much pop, and even though I was much more orchestrally influenced early, I'm not going to listen to Mahler 5 Symphony when I'm working out. It's just not something I'm really looking to do.
Yeah, but I gotta say, a guy who's like just working his guts out and sweating, and then you find out he's listening to classical music, that's probably the most dangerous guy in the gym, you know?
This is true. Yeah, that would freak me out a little bit. Yeah. That would be pretty intimidating.
For sure. If right now you could send a piece of advice back to your past self, what would you tell that past self?
I guess it's become comfortable with the fact that developing your taste is practicing music. By finding new music, you are practicing music because you are formulating your tastes. And don't be so hard on yourself. I really wish I wasn't so hard on myself about everything. And I still am like that. I don't think I'll ever release anything I'll be happy with. And maybe that's part of the reason I keep doing it, is because I want to keep getting better. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But it definitely needs to be a balance where I've struggled with, I guess you could say, self-doubt. And I think a lot of creatives have that tendency to almost paralyze themselves with so much doubt that they end up doing nothing. And that's something that I've definitely had a problem with. You get to the point where you're like, you know what? I just don't care. I don't care anymore. I feel like I have to do something with my interests or the taste that you've cultivated. And if that happens to be making music, cool. And if it doesn't, that's cool too. So a lot of it's just don't be so hard on yourself, and realize that there's ups and downs with everything. And a lot of what makes opportunity in the future is what you're doing now. How are you developing taste? How you're developing the things you're interested in. So in college, I joined a reggae band, and that kind of got me interested in really tight grooves. And then I found Meshuggah, which is basically like metal reggae in a lot of ways. And so it's everything builds on itself, and so it's a process. And get comfortable with the process, and not be so hard on yourself. For sure, that's what I would tell myself.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that is something that I've stumbled upon often in just creative self-help type material, is this idea of you have got to be your biggest fan. You've got to love every sound you make, even if it's not the one you were aiming for, because that's how it will get there, Right.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think there's a lot of people that make music for the sake of releasing music, whereas I think in order to release something really genuine, you should like it. You should be like, what, I wonder what people think of this, because I'm really digging it. And that's where I really decided to actually release music, was when I was like, this is actually pretty cool. I wonder what other people might think. In a lot of ways, the artistry, I guess we could, sometimes it gets too esoteric, the talk of creativity, to the point where it's like, all right, this is just too subjective that you can't even get anything out of it. But at the same time, you kind of need it to be received by someone else to complete the circle of that creative process, I think. To really, doesn't necessarily mean they have to love it, but to have someone else experience it and see how they, see what they may think is important. So I set the goal that if one person said they liked it, that was success. Or if even one person said they gave it a shot, that was success in my book. So to be on a podcast and have people chatting about it is pretty damn cool to me. That's pretty surreal.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you a moment to introduce the first of your tracks we're going to listen to together, Redacted. Tell me, why is it named Redacted?
Well, I guess that could get onto another thread of, I guess, the theme of the album, which, since it has no lyrics, you might think, how can it have a theme for anything? But a couple years ago, I got really interested in, I guess you could say, alternative forms of like history. And in a lot of ways, especially going through education, you can probably get the sense that the interpretation of history is kind of messed up in our society in a lot of ways, to a point where actually we know much less about historical fact than we might want to think. So we really only know as far as written history in the last 2,000 years. So what happened before that? And that's what I became really interested in, is what happened before recorded history. Were there other civilizations that have existed? So that was something I was really interested in. So for a theme, that's what a lot of this is about. And redacted is just another term for it's being censored. So that's the name of the track. And as far as musically, the track, I wanted to open it with the first track. Actually, it's called New Light, and all it is a short little trumpet part that I recorded as an intro, and then it drops right into Redacted. And I wanted it to really set the tone. So the opening is, hey, this is trumpet. Okay, weird. What am I going to expect next? And then the next track just drops into this, I guess you could say, really low-tuned metal part that I kind of wanted to set the tone for the album, so that people are kind of listening for the trumpet, but also realizing that it's in the context of progressive metal. So that was kind of my thought process for as far as the ordering, as far as having it second.
Mercy. That's all. That's all I can say for the next 30 seconds at least. Is just what.
It's pretty out there. Yeah,
it's so. I mean, but it's so tight and out there. It's crazy to have such a good combination of the two. You know,
the weird syncopated double kick part. I just legit went just as I'm going to make the craziest thing, and that's what came out. It was pretty crazy. I'm not even sure if I could play it that well. I've tried to play it since, and it's pretty damn hard. It's kind of like Meshuggah's Bleed. You've probably heard of that track. It's one of their most famous tracks. what's interesting is they wrote everything basically on that album with sampled drums. And then he would go and then learn the songs afterwards. And I can just imagine if I had to learn that song to play it live. First off, I don't know how I play drums and trumpet at the same time. That would be pretty impressive. But if I had to play that song live, that would be a bitch to learn for sure. But yeah, it's like an Animals as Leaders weird prog metal section that I thought was cool. Somebody had mentioned the trap beat. I want to give a shout out to my cousin. He's probably not listening, but he actually produces trap, hip hop, and rap beats. And I asked him if he could write a beat, and I then cut it up and then put it in different sections to kind of change up the feel a little bit. I thought it was cool that you have the trap beat with the drums, and then the trap beat cuts out and you just have the acoustic drums. I thought it went well together.
Yeah. Also, the way it ends with just like that big 808 boom and the hi-hats going, like
those sprinkler beats.
Yeah. Very, very cool stuff. Like just the combination. I'm fumbling over my words with excitement right now. The very astute, wonderful combination of mixing these electronic drums and these acoustic drums together. Like it is not something that I often hear and think, oh wow, that's seamless. Usually when I hear that as a drummer and as like a musician, I think, I wish they had not mixed, like uncanny valley's me, you know?
Do you remember in the probably early 2000s where the fad was that you mix like weird like dubstep beats with like violin or orchestral music? I don't think that really ever worked that well, and I hated it when it was out, and so I was really trying not to have that kind of vibe.
Yeah. So you've already kind of gone over this idea of creating drums first, and also this I'm going to call it like a mantra of yours, this a pillar of your creative mind being change the process, change the outcome. But if you could, what other types of processes have you found that are best practices, things you would share with others if you were trying to help them get into a more creative process?
I guess a lot of it has to do with the hardest thing is where to start, I think, with this. Because once you start, you can just mess around, and that's what I would really encourage is embrace the process of just messing around. You're not going to know what you're doing at the beginning of this, and I can't say I necessarily know what I'm doing now. And that's part of the fun is that you don't know what you're going to end up with. And so I would say really, I hate to come back to it, but finding your process or how you go about making stuff. So if you have a melody that you hear that you'd like, if you have a USB keyboard at home, like very basic setup with just a laptop, and just figure out that melody. Try to tap it out on a piano. So if you're looking for some place to start, that's where you can start. Whether or not you can record it or not really isn't important. You can just have your phone out and hum a melody into your phone, and you can have that to listen to later to try to figure out on the piano. But finding out a place to start, I think, is the hardest part. So a lot of it's just figuring out, what are your tastes? What do you like to hear? What gets you excited? For me, especially when I wanted to start the metal project, because that was the first thing I did, was I just want to make some really aggressive, cool stuff. And, then it became, okay, how do I accomplish that? So if you're in a position where you want to get started, it's really easy now. The barrier to entry is so low now that it costs very little to actually make music, which is, we were talking about the advantages of, I guess, modern technology. It's all cheap. You can get free plugins, you can get free synths, you can get basically an interface for less than $100. You can get a MIDI controller for about the same price, and if you've got a laptop, you're pretty much set to go. And don't let the lack of equipment limit you. In a lot of ways, you can kind of make excuses why you can't possibly produce something. Because I've been there. I've been like, well, I can't possibly do this until I have this particular microphone that will capture this performance perfectly. Never mind that I needed to actually work on the performance and not just upgrade equipment. So don't get really too bogged down in equipment, but just get started. That's really what I have to say is get started, because the longer you think about it, you'll think of millions of ways why you shouldn't do something. And that's why I didn't create music for so long, because there was too many reasons why I can't. Well, I should be focused on things that create economic value for me, or that advance my career, or do the things that society says you should be doing. And don't let that stop you. A lot of this is a mental recovery project. That's kind of what I used it as, is a way to come home, unwind, get my mind on other things. Kind of similar to what you're saying about reading, working out, doing other things to get your mind away from the doldrums of everyday life. Because if you only have that, it can get really frustrating. So this is really an outlet for me to kind of recover creatively, or I guess cognitively, just to get my mind off of everything. Don't set out just to say, oh, I'm going to create a platinum record, because that would be a difficult thing to say. But if you just set out to say, hey, once a week I'm going to try to sit down and just mess around, that's a much more easily attainable goal to just get started.
To do it once a week, you're going to get something better out of that, both for your emotional health and also the things you're creating. You're going to get something better out of a once than you will out of saying, this weekend I'm writing a hit or I'll die.
Exactly. I'm trying to, people, especially creatives and people that have done this before, and you yourself, I imagine this, I've heard it referred to as a flow state. It's a state where basically it's a state where you look at the clock and 5 hours have gone by. That means you were probably in the best state of mind, because you weren't really thinking about the passage of time or how long things are taking. You're just doing something and going. So I try to chase that. Like, so at night, if I'm doing that kind of stuff, if I look at the clock and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I started at 9, I'm like, okay, that was a good time, because I got my mind completely off of everything. So I kind of chase that flow state where the ideas are just flowing through you and you're not necessarily as critical. Now you can go back afterwards the next day and go, okay, which of these ideas is worth keeping? You can always do that, because that's a good idea. Self-editing is kind of a difficult thing to do, but something you will get better at as you do it.
Yeah. I love there's a quote by Ernest Hemingway, and I'm sure there's a good chance it's by somebody else, but I've seen it attributed to Ernest Hemingway about writing drunk and editing sober. So
yes.
if you apply that to the flow state, if you apply like write, just create while you are fully engaged in creating. Don't edit yourself. Don't take yourself out of creativity, to edit yet. Just do that tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. I've had some things where I was like, that there's actually some parts of the album that were originally things that I never thought I would use, but ended up working in a different context that at that moment I didn't hear that they worked. But later on, I was just moving some trumpet parts around that I recorded, and I was like, actually, I think this works really well in this section. So don't erase anything that you've created, because you may be able to use it down the road in a way that you never really imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the never erase anything lifestyle,
Because I definitely have more uncompleted projects than I do completed. That's definitely, I have no shortage.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you specifically about that. I looked, the album, the Antediluvian Project, is the name of the project, but also the name of the self-released first album, I'll call it. And it's 40 minutes and 55 seconds long. How many minutes and hours of unreleased material go along with that from before you put it together and released it?
At least the same amount of time. So there's probably at least 40 minutes of stuff that didn't make it, but it's mostly fragments. It's not complete ideas.
Gotcha.
And those could be used down the road. I'm working on another track now, because what I really wanted to do was release an album. I know that the album format is basically dead, and we can get on a whole nother discussion about whether or not it's actually useful to release a whole album instead of releasing it in parts, because there's merits to both arguments. If you're really looking to take advantage long term of an album, you're probably better off releasing them singles. But what I really wanted to do is establish, I guess, an identity for myself as far as releasing a complete work. And for me, I'm kind of old-fashioned, and I think that the album format is kind of a complete work, whereas singles, it's just kind of fragments of things, whereas I wanted a complete work that kind of has a theme. So I wanted to do that first, but now I'm working on other tracks that'll be released as singles. I just released collaboration with Flora Lynn. She did vocals over the High Jump track that we just released yesterday, and she did an amazing job with those. And that's kind of something I'm going to be doing too, is trying to add some vocals to them, because a lot of these, adding vocals just adds another dimension that I didn't really imagine. It's kind of like rediscovering the songs again. So it's been kind of a cool experience too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one thing I've learned hanging out with so many producers is how the vocal part in a lot of ways creates its own additional layers on top of the layers, both melodically and lyrically. It brings in a different context to enjoy. It would be cool to hear the Antediluvian Project re-released with all vocals, like a two-part album, you know? So you actually already touched a little bit on the next question that I wanted to ask you, and that was kind of how do you promote? What have been the most successful practices you found in getting this music into the ears of listeners who may not love this kind of music yet, or may already be looking for exactly what it is?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first off, I have to commend your efforts at Indie Music Feedback, both with the podcast and the Discord and the Reddit, because it provides such a boost to new artists in an environment where it's actually difficult to self-promote. I found, even with the internet being what it is, where you can send things to anyone across the planet, there's a lot of rules in a lot of subreddits and a lot of websites that really discourage self-promotion. And I totally get why. I totally understand why, because it'll just become a bogged down mess of people trying to self-promote their stuff. But what I really liked about, so I posted on Indie Music Feedback, and I just picked a bunch of subreddits that I thought might fit or be interested in the genre, and posted a track, and it ended up getting some traction on Indie Music, so that was my first, I guess you could say, big exposure to more people was Indie Music Feedback on Reddit. But I mostly stuck to Reddit. I'm active on Instagram. I haven't really got too much, I guess you could say, interaction on feedback, but it's mostly with the same people that I talk to within a group. But a lot of it's just finding people that are legitimately interested in your music, and it's just really flattering to see anyone comment that they listen to it. And that's really the point I want to focus on is there's so many ways to buy likes and views, but that's actually not the most important thing. You should really be looking for authentic responses to your music, because it's really the only way you know if what you're doing is really resonating with somebody. And not to say that's the goal, but to really get a realistic picture of, you know, what do people think of what you're doing? That's the only way to do it. And so authentic interaction is definitely the best way to do it. And places like this, places like the Reddit, the Indie Music Feedback Reddit, are just great places to just legitimately share music. A lot of this Discord in general and the Indie Music Feedback one really reminds me of the early forum style of the internet. I don't know if you remember that, but basically the internet in the early 2000s was basically just message forums. That's how people communicated. And I still think that was the best form of online conversation, because the focus isn't likes or dislikes, because that's not even on here, there's no like or dislike. You can like something, but that's not the focal point of it. Whereas the focus is the interaction with other people and sharing information. So those are the places where I really focused on trying to get actual authentic interaction with other people and just, you know, get legitimate feedback. I'm really trying to improve the mixing. Some of the mixing aspects of the album I'd like to improve, some of which I did for the release that Flora Lynn and I released yesterday. But it's just a constant experimentation, just trying to improve. But yeah, that's really, I guess, I released the album and then thought to myself, oh crap, I've got to promote this somehow. So I was really figuring out as I went.
Yeah, and I'd say adding to that, like, word of mouth may not be the fastest way to promote something or grow a fan base, but it will become the most solid fan base. People who have interacted with you and you know, found this music as something that they enjoy, they will tell their friends with more vigor than anybody getting paid to do so will, you know?
Right. Yeah. It's being authentic with it. People don't want to really see, you know, paid advertisements, because it doesn't seem authentic because you paid for the advertisement. But when you post to a subreddit and say, hey, like, I weighed this weird metal, what do you think? It's difficult to say that it has any ulterior motives. And I think people do realize that aspect of things.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I would like to move into the the game portion of the interview. When I mentioned there's a game in the interview to you suggested some questions that to me immediately put my mind in a first date question type game. And then that's something my wife and I, we go, you know, if we go out to eat before COVID, obviously, we will look up first date questions on Google and just sit there and talk to each other and answering these weird questions.
That's not a bad idea, actually.
It's a lot of fun. So she and I together, we came up with some specific for you first date questions that we would like to just get your input on, and then we're going to let the beauty of democracy. We're going to let the people listening live right now decide if they would go on a second date with you.
Oh wow!
So
Wow.
here we go. First
Pressure's
one.
on.
Yeah, we're gonna start out real simple. First one: trapped on a desert island. What would you bring? Your drum set or your trumpet?
Definitely drum set, because I feel like it would be easier to communicate with indigenous tribes with percussion instruments than a trumpet.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I mean,
You could scare away predators,
yes,
possibly a bit easier.
I've got to believe at the very least snakes who hear through their bellies would hate percussion being.
They would hate it. They could feel it. Yeah, they would feel it for sure.
You'd make them raft out of the drums. Also, passing ships in the distance, they've got to be able to hear a snare crack pretty
absolutely.
Easy.
Right, absolutely.
Awesome. I
think that thing a bit higher. Yeah.
I think you chose right, and I think everybody here debating marriage eventually is probably moving a little closer to a long-term commitment with you.
Nice.
Here we go. Almost same exact question, but different context. Who would win in a fight, Miles Davis or Buddy Rich?
Was Buddy Rich the guy that was kind of a dick?
Oh, he was extremely a dick. Yeah.
I got to go with Miles Davis.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I would have to too. He lived a harder life.
He argued with. He was able to. He was enemies with Wynton Marsalis, who's a trumpet player. He's a very famous classical trumpet player. When he was coming up, he was basically doing a side gig with Miles to basically come on and solo here and there in one of Miles' sets. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, unrehearsed and in the wrong time, Wynton just came on stage while Miles was playing, and Miles turned to him and said, "What the fuck are you doing?" Because Wynton was really cocky and thought that he could basically be on stage with Miles Davis, and Miles Davis was like, "Dude, I brought you here, not the other way around," type deal.
Yeah.
And it's like a famous interaction that Miles and Wynton have. So after that, everyone was like, "Oh, did you see the Wynton and Miles fight on stage?" And it wasn't a fight, but it was definitely a battle of wits for sure. I'm definitely taking Miles Davis. I'm not messing with Miles Davis.
That's fantastic. I like that story. He's got that laser beam. What do you do? Like the ability to freeze a man with a question. Right. That's power. Yep. I like it.
Definitely.
All right. Third question. At this point, your date leaves the table and she's gone. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. At 30 minutes, you start to suspect maybe she or he or they or whoever it is you're dating has bailed upon you. They're no longer there. So you get up and you look around and you discover your date has been kidnapped by the mafia for a gambling debt. What do you do?
Well, buy another drink, first off. But I'm definitely going after the mob for sure, because this sounds like a good action movie.
Yeah.
Intro, for sure.
Can you imagine a trumpet playing drummer like in a Liam Neeson style take-in murder fest situation? I'd watch that movie today. Yeah.
This is kind of it's kind of when you go up to the course, take it, you chug it, and then you're off to defeat the mob.
Yeah. Yes. I love it. You got to break that glass on the first mobster's face.
Right. Exactly. And as you're leaving, it's like smoky noir music, like 20s, black and white.
Suddenly the whole world is in black and white. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think your willingness to hunt down and murder the people who stole me. I'm just going to put myself in this story all of a sudden. Stole me on our first date. That really shows an ability to be in it for the long haul. So my vote is yes. Second date, positive. Oh, it looks like we've got a lot of good replies. It looks like, we've got one person saying you probably should not have let them get kidnapped in the first place. So you're already on thin ice. Now, Loam brings up a wonderful point. What if on this date 2 you find out this person hates pizza? Was it even worth it?
Well, am I still trying to save them, and then I find out that they don't like pizza?
Yeah. How about that? We find out, you're the mob boss. You're in that last fight scene, and he says, "I can't believe you've chosen this second date person. They don't even like pizza." And then they give you the option to walk away forever.
That wouldn't be a deal breaker.
They wouldn't.
I'd still go after him. No.
Yes, I like to believe at this point you just want the privilege of fighting mobsters.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, your workouts aren't doing it for you anymore. You've got to get something harder and more visceral. So
Yeah, it's like the Taken. I will find you and I will kill you.
Yeah. Awesome. I believe you have won this game in flying colors.
Excellent.
Howdy again, y'all. I hope you're enjoying the interview so far. John is an insightful guy with a lot of helpful things to say about staying creative, and I'm really grateful for his time. I hope you take some time to check out his music. I'll have a link in the show notes. And of course, check out the show's link tree for all the social media, all the sponsors, all the past episodes, and of course, ways you can connect with me. You can send me an email if you'd like to be on the show. If you know someone you think should be on the show, let me know. Leave a review, rate, subscribe, follow, and tell a friend. Let's get back to the episode. I love asking folks, why is it you're making music? What is it you're hoping the listener gets out of what you've made or happens in your own life?
I think if somebody listens to it and finds it remotely interesting, that's the goal. But for me, it's the joy of making something and having a finished product, and it's the thrill of discovery of just figuring out what kind of stuff can I make? What can I do with a trumpet and progressive metal? That's kind of been just the goal. And set realistic expectations. Anyone out there that's a creative looking to create something, have realistic expectations. But that doesn't mean have no expectations.
I often think of things as whether or not they are their own reward or not. And it sounds like to you, like the creativity, the making of it is why you make it in some regard. Yeah.
Be okay with the fact that this is not how you want to make your living. You separate your economic utility from your creative. You don't always have to combine the two. And that's actually something that's difficult to come to grips with, because when you start something, you start putting time into it, you immediately start thinking, well, what kind of return is this going to have? Is this investment something that it's going to be worth it? And it's tough to get out of that mode. With other things, you have to have that mentality. But with something creative, be willing to separate it from that economic or perceived economic success and just have fun. Do it for fun.
Absolutely. There's a recurring theme in some meditation and Buddhist stuff I've read, more modern stuff, that will point out how in the West everything has to go through a monetization filter in our minds, to the point that we don't eat breakfast because we're eating breakfast. We eat breakfast so we can have enough energy to earn money, And
it makes sense why that's happened. I mean, we basically have become run by economists and technologists, and that is what our worth is summed down to. You are like labor utility. It's basically how you're classified as an individual in, a society based on that idea that you're talking about with Western civilization. It sucks that it's become that. We didn't used to be like that, especially when you look at, like, say, Victorian era of Western civilization. We had a much better balance of, I guess, the Western philosophy, but also looking towards the future. We really, in this day and age, we want one or the other, but you can actually combine both, because you need the past to influence the future, but you shouldn't be always just stuck in the past. And it's kind of an absolute balance that we need to strike with that. I've been reading more into Buddhist and Hindu stuff in the last couple of years. I find it really interesting. I read, I think it was the Bhagavad Gita. Read some of that.
I am become death.
Yes, yeah, kind of a lot of similar to a lot of the threads regarding the killing the ego, and separating your identity from what you do, or even what you think, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Like, one thing I really love about Hindu. This is, again, a very strange. I think you and I have read some of the same things, and maybe we should have a separate conversation someday where we just talk about that.
Absolutely. I could definitely have a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, but I love how all of the Hindu deities have two forms, like both a male. They're all both male and female. They're all both good and evil, because being a living thing is complex and it's more than one action at a time. Yes.
Yeah, we want a very easy answer, but that's just not the case. Even if you ask the question, like, what is music? For example, well, what is it? Is it the notes on the page? We want a 2 + 2 = 4 answer, but there's very few things in life that are that simple.
Yeah, is it the notes or is it the spaces?
There's actually in your notes that you had sent me, you had told me about a book to recommend, and I guess I can interject with that.
Oh yeah,
I've been
please
reading.
do.
It's called Sound in Motion by David McGill, and he was a professional bassoonist in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
Mm.
And there was in this book there is a chapter that it basically starts off with what is music, and interestingly, he um, basically goes into a class he took with a professor who it was a intro music class for college, and he asked the question he showed a picture of what looked like a dog in a field, and he asked the question, what means that this is alive? And so people say, well, it's a dog. Of course it's alive. Well, how do you know it's alive from just this picture? And they basically came down to the point that it's alive when it moves. And it's the same thing with music. So what is music? Well, it moves. That's when you know something is music, is when it moves from one thing to another. And that's why music can be more interesting in one context than another. So yeah, like, things can be broken down to such levels that it's pretty interesting when you start asking even fundamental questions and how hard it can be to answer them.
Yeah, man, I got no joke, goosebumps from that story.
It's really good. This book is incredible. He goes into some stuff that a lot of it's above my head, because he goes into a lot of the, I guess you could say, the rote method of music and explaining certain things, because there's a difference between music played by a professional musician and maybe, say, someone just listening casually. They're definitely not the same experience. But really interesting book. That's definitely one I recommend for musicians or creatives looking to get just another, I guess, perspective on this thing we're trying to make our way through.
Thanks, man. It is on the list for sure. I've been doing a lot of creative fuel reading so I can be better at this show.
Yeah, you're doing a great job. I mean, this is...
Hey, man, thank you. I want to give, this is a very new bullet point that I have on my notes here. Used to be, I would ask, where can we find you online? And that to me became kind of redundant whenever I would put the link in the show notes anyway. So I want to make space for you to explain that. Once people have gone where you are online, what do they do to best support you?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer, but I would say YouTube, I have a bunch of videos. What I would encourage anyone interested, is if they're interested in the music, to look into some of the videos to just see how I went about creating it, because I think that might add some more context. Otherwise, Bandcamp is always a good one if you want to own your music and download it kind of old-fashioned way, but I prefer Bandcamp as far as an outlet. So that's a good place to go if you're looking to support anybody, and try to support them the best way possible. Otherwise, wherever you want to listen to it is up to you, but the fact, if you listen to it, that's the reward for me. So however you are interested in it, and if you like it, share it. That's awesome. I'd love to get more perspectives. And then definitely Instagram, I'm pretty active on there. And again, I post a lot of stuff with me just noodling around, and you can kind of look to see a little bit more into my process specifically that I've been talking about. That's what I have to say. If you're interested in music, look into some of those things to kind of get a deeper look into how I go about it, and definitely reach out and say hi. It's just awesome to hear from people that have found and dig the weird music I make. That's just awesome.
For sure, man. Awesome. Well, I'm super grateful for your time. I want to jump into the last track. Jump. I didn't even mean to do that. I want to jump into the last track you're going to share with us today,
Nice.
Which is called High Jump, but it is a redo of a track on the more recent album, right? It's like you were saying. Yeah. So introduce that to us. How did you and the vocalist hook up?
Well, interestingly, she found the track that I posted on Reddit, sent me a message, and she's active on it too. So if you search, what's her name? It's just Flora Lynn. That's her name on here. She has Flora Lynn MU is her username. She's active on here much more than I am, and she hit me up on. Perfect. She hit me up on Reddit and said, she did my music. And originally she recorded vocals for a different song, and she ended up liking the High Jump song a little more and had some really interesting ideas and just said, hey, here's some ideas. What do you think? And I was like, well, I'm just going to, this is perfect. I love it how it is. I'm just going to mix these. And so she re-recorded them. The interesting thing is it's the first time I've mixed vocals. So it was definitely a learning experience with trying to make everything work. Vocals are difficult to fit in the mix as far as to make everything audible while still sounding huge. So that's something I'm still working on. But that's the that's the background on that track. So for the last about the last month, I've sent her mix. I think it took like 13 mixes to get to the final one. I would just send her mixes, and we'd listen on different things to see how they translated, and that's kind of that's the end result.
Hold on, 99, 100. Okay, push-ups done. It is crazy how if you took the vocals off of that, it would be intense and almost like give you a heart murmur trying to follow it. Her vocals glue it together so groovy. So
yes. I noticed the same thing when I was mixing it. I was like, it was like one of those cases where I didn't know it was missing, but it was missing. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, that really brings a lot of it together. I like the instrumental version, don't get me wrong, but the vocal version, I think, adds a dimension that it just fits it so well, for sure.
Yeah. especially her vocal choices, because I could easily hear that backing track going with a guy like, you know, a harsh vocalist, a screamo metal vocalist type thing, and that would have escalated that tension. But her vocal on it in a way like mixed with the tension in a way that became like a really just a different kind of piece. So good, man. Thank you for sharing that.
Have you? Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who commented. That's awesome. But I was going to say, have you ever heard of the Contortionists, the band?
Yeah, I've heard of them. I don't know that I've listened to them.
Well, they did. They released an album called Language, I think in like 2012, 2013, that has very little harsh vocals and is mostly clean sung, and it's very ethereal. And that's kind of the style that Flora had for this track. So I was just, I was really digging it for sure. I think it fit in really well in a really creative way, in a way that I really didn't imagine.
Yeah. That's awesome to hear. And it's cool to have both released now, so people can hear, you know, they can listen to the instrumental version and have their own imagination go wild on vocals, and then hear the vocalized version and see just how it lines up. You know, it's cool, man. Well, awesome. Well, I want to, just before we end the call, give you a moment if you want to. You know, you've already shouted out a cousin of yours, but if you have any other shout outs you'd like to do to be sure they are recorded forever in the cloud, whatever that exactly is. The floor is yours.
Well, I just wanted to thank all of you guys for tuning in. Anyone who's taken a listen to my music, it means a ton to have anyone interested remotely in the things that I'm creating in this bedroom here. Definitely be active on social media with me. I respond to every comment, every email, everything that I get. I respond to everything because I feel like it's just such an important thing to do, and I'm so appreciative of all the attention and interest in the stuff that I'm doing. I have to say, I have to thank my parents for being open to me pursuing music in a lot of ways when I was younger, paying for lessons, encouraging me to keep going with certain things that even if they didn't result in the things I imagined they might, they contributed to who I am and what I'm doing now. So I definitely don't want to discount anything that I've already done or been through, because it's kind of amalgamated into this project. So it's been really cool. And again, I can't thank you enough for even thinking to invite me on, and everyone for being interested in the stuff I'm saying. Hopefully it makes some sense.
It absolutely has. I feel a personal eagerness to go play music right now, just to experiment with the joy that you have shared with us. So thanks, man.
Are you working on any music?
Oh, always. I'm always trying to make something.
Awesome. Yeah. I'd love to hear it whenever you do get something in even a remotely finished form.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. Awesome. Well, with that, I'll let you go, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, man.
Peace. I'm so grateful for everything John was able to share with me today. His willingness to experiment, to enjoy even the parts that suck, I think is the way he put it. His willingness to share his music with other people, to kind of test the waters of what people like without finding his own value in that, because creating music for him has become a therapeutic thing. So whether or not people love it or like it, he's willing to make it. He's enjoying making it, and enjoying it in that way is creating a quality of art that people are going to enjoy. And I think he is evidence of that, and probably would tell you that it is worth trying. I hope you've heard something that gets you engaging with your own creativity this week. And if you do, please send it to me. Send me an email. The email is in the link tree in the show notes. Or come find me on the IMF Discord. We would all love to get to know you and have you, and it's a community worth being a part of if you are seeking a more creative lifestyle. I'm very grateful for the time you used to listen today, and I hope we get to share some more time soon. But until then, please stay courageous, stay curious, and stay creative.